Something that I'm known for is my illustrative logos. People love the style that I draw in, so I'm gonna teach you how I draw like that. Just for some background, I did initially start school in an animation program and I ended up with a business degree, but animation was a lifelong passion of mine and I learned a lot about illustration from that phase of my life. I'm gonna apply some of those principles here and teach you what those are. To start out, I need to know what the size of the text will be and what the weight of that text, like the line weight of that text will be. That's super critical here. It will inform the line weight of the illustration because the illustration will feel out of place, or it will be hidden, or it'll be too in your face if it doesn't sit well with the text. So I always start by blocking out where that text will be. This isn't the final version of the text by any means, but I can tell by the length of the words how thick or how big the letters need to be. The name of this company is Dali, like short and sweet. It's a short word, it's only 5 letters. And then I don't know if this is actually accurate, the electric code, but I was just putting it there as a placeholder for now. Essentially, I know there's like a subtext here that needs to be secondary to the main text. Because this is an illustrative logo, it's still a logo, Dali needs to be the first thing you read. Quickly, this is me showing you how thick the letters are. I'm actually doing some line weight in the letters themselves and just trying to emphasize the word Dali over electrico. With that informed, I'm now going to start sketching in the line weight of the illustration. As you can see, I did a really rough sketch in the background of the actual dimensions and anatomy of the horse, but I don't want to be too realistic and I don't want to use really fine lines. So this step is me blocking in just the line weight. Something really critical here is remembering a trick I actually learned from trying to learn how to cell shade, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and anyways, all those animated cartoons from when we were kids. The line weight can imply a shadow. So in like a flat animation, they might not be shadowing and like shading every single character, every single frame. That's a lot of work in a 2D animated show. And so what they'll do is they'll use the line weight to inform where the shadows are. So where the line weight is the thickest, it will show that it's like deeper. Like think about like a wood carving with a little bit of a shadow to it. Like think about that way when you're drawing the lines. So here you can see the belly of the horse. It's the bottom of the horse. I want it to have more weight than the spine of the horse will have. You'll see that when I draw it here in a second. But there's also a trick. You can see I'm kind of curving the corners where shapes overlap. So where the legs overlap the belly, I added a little bit more of a curve. Where the front leg overlaps the back leg. They're both the hind legs, but the one that's closer to the screen, it overlaps the other one. So I put a little bit of a curve there and I made that section of the line a little bit thicker. This is super critical to showing the form without shading in that whole leg and making it a huge spot that the eye is drawn to. What I'm doing here is just visually using only line weight to tuck certain elements of the horse into the background. That gives it a very 3-dimensional look. Now I did use the photo reference here, so I know the anatomy is close. I know that structurally this looks like a 3-dimensional horse, but I have to really sell that when this logo is in 2D. When it's one color on another color or on a t-shirt or on the side of a van or something like that, I have to show the scale, the 3 dimensions of the horse. In this case, it's meant to kind of look 3-dimensional. It's not like super cartoon and flat. But I'm going to keep using those cartoon principles I learned when I was studying animation to illustrate this horse, to illustrate this logo. Moving on here, I'm adding some more details. I think the face in general is often the most detailed part of anything you illustrate. It's really important to have details on something that needs to be specifically recognizable. Or here, I need to show the reins, the harness on this horse. I have to show those, and they're very, very small for the line weight that I have in this illustration. Like if I illustrated those, they would stick out like a sore thumb. They just don't blend in, they don't match. I also don't want to make them a part of the illustration. They're there, but they need to be tucked away. You know what I mean? So something I'm thinking about is, how am I going to illustrate those thin little straps? How am I going to show that they exist and have a function without making them the most important part of this illustration? Because they're not. The most important part of this illustration is the recognizability, that's not even a word, whatever, of the horse, because this is a very specific horse to the owner, but also the act, the dally, which is pulling of the log, okay? That is what I am showing here, and that is the most important thing. So you'll see me kind of rework this horse's neck a little bit. I felt that the curve was too show horsey, like too like feminine, for like a lack of a better word. So I'm over here like trying to strengthen the neck because this horse is pulling. There is a lot of power in this horse, like horsepower, obviously. I'm trying to show that in the illustration, and I'm doing that with the lines, but specifically with the line weight as well. I'm going into making the head outline even thicker because it just felt too dainty. It didn't fit. Like, this horse is a powerful horse, and I needed to show that with the line weight. Again, kind of around the bottom of the mouth area where the neck hits the head. Those are the bottom, like the shaded parts of this horse. So they're a little bit thicker. That's intentional to show, again, the 3 dimensions of the horse. Here, I'm just making sure I like the scale of the head. I actually shrunk it a bit from the photo reference. I thought the smaller head kind of showed the muscles of the horse better, and it kind of let the words speak for themselves. If the head was as big as the letter D, it kind of like competed visually. Here, I'm also kind of shrinking the legs just a little bit because I felt like I accidentally drew them too long. Again, I think I'm confused by the photo reference because the horse that I'm referencing is actually in water and it kind of hides the hooves. So I had to improvise a little bit there. Just so you know though, if you ever want to get really good at drawing horses, and you still have access to a DVD player, the behind the scenes of Spirit, Stallion of the Cimarron, has incredible drawing lessons about horses. I learned everything about horse drawing, anatomy, everything from that, and I think I watched it like at least 10 times. So when people are like, oh my God, how are you so good at drawing horses? I spent some time in the behind the scenes section of the Spirit, Stallion of the Cimarron DVD, let me tell you. And isn't that just some 90s kid core? I don't know. My sister was a horse girl, I was not, but I mean, she had Briar's dolls. We had the Serafina trading cards. I mean, thankfully know a lot about horses despite never being a horse girl myself. Anyway, back to drawing. This is when I noticed I've been drawing crooked the whole time, and I was like, oh no, like this is kind of annoying. You'll see me correct it later in the video, but for now I'm just rolling with it. I start to make sure that I like the visual direction that this, I mean that direction as in like literal arrows, right? Like, do I like the horse pulling the log? Does that make me read the logo, or does it hide the letters? Like, is the illustration too powerful? Something that I've also learned is Western animation. Usually the characters are walking from the left of the screen to the right because that implies a moving of forwardness, right? Like, if it's an animation, if it's a story, a video, it is moving forward in time, it is telling a story. And so usually a character will go from left of screen to the right of screen, just like you're reading a book. But sometimes in anime, it's the other way around because they read right to left, right? So that's something to think about here. This is obviously an American company, and you're gonna read the English words like left to right. So I thought about it, I was like, do I need the horse facing the other direction, right? Like, is the horse facing the wrong direction? I have to think about that when I'm looking at this logo. But I decided to keep it the same way as the photo reference because I thought the overall shape like created an arrow. Okay, Editing Mag decided to go in and add these red lines to show you what I mean. Basically, the illustration as a whole, the silhouette of the whole illustration is an arrow pointing to the right. So it actually has a lot of momentum to keep your eye rereading the logo and looking at the illustration and then reading the logo again. And that is why I ended up keeping this direction, this angle of the horse. Now is when I start going in and adding the smaller details. I do want some level of detail here, but I don't want the detail to hide or be hairline thin. It needs to fit with the scale of the line weight, the scale of the illustration, and the scale at which this logo will be seen. Think about this, like, when is this logo ever gonna be across a whole wall? Very, very not often. This is meant for like t-shirts, the side of the van, like nothing crazy big. So it's okay to go really simple with the details. You have to just imply that there's a lot more texture there than there really is. So this horse is muscular. I have to define those muscles, but it would look kind of silly if I went and defined every single muscle. So here I am being really picky about which ones I do define. You can see on the horse's front right arm, I have that line going down and it curves again into the shadow of the leg that's closer to the viewer. again, to hide that leg and put it like in the background, but it still shows the muscle of the horse, and it lets the other leg that is in front kind of like bulk out and stand out more, if that makes sense. It's kind of hard to explain what I'm doing there. This is when I went and redrew the neck again because it wasn't straight enough, and I think this actually really fixed it. This started to look really good at this point. Here I am just kind of going in and tweaking things. The tail felt a little weird to me, so I fixed that. And here I am just like tweaking some spacing. This is not the final line art at all, but it's getting really close. This is when I'm like, okay, pretty happy with how this is looking. We're getting closer. I noticed a few things weren't straight, which is my fault for not drawing on a straight line to begin with. So I just go and correct that here. Again, everything is with the intention of feeling balanced, visual balance. If you haven't already been to art school or taken art classes or anything of that sort, visual balance is so important. And that is essentially like the strongest thing. That's the biggest thing you need to know as an illustrator or as a logo designer, graphic designer. You have to know how to achieve a visual balance. I think that's one of the reasons people like to hire me so much. I studied so much about illustration and graphic design and animation before I ended up in this business. So as much as I love typography and all of that, I'm so focused on the overall look. I treat every logo like it's just an illustration or a frame of an animation. That is my passion, and that is how I approach it. So that's one thing that I keep to be unique to myself, I guess. Not like only to me, but like that's something that makes me unique, I guess. Hard to explain. Anyway, here I am just like really going in and refining the details I want to show, because the next step is to actually outline this whole thing, which I will be showing you in a little while. Here I am just going to quickly straighten this out so that I know what I'm doing and can finally finish setting up the illustration for proper drawing. I just used the bottom of the artboard instead of a guide, but that's okay. Next, I realized that the lettering wasn't honestly as balanced as I wanted it to be. And again, this is nowhere near the final lettering, but I needed to fix that before I go in and draw the final art. So here I am just adding a little bit of weight to the horse by adding a shadow there. The visual weight comes from the darkness, all right? And then I realized that the log needed to be from the same bottom parameter. Like it was too low to the horse. So I had to raise the log. And then that made the lettering kind of look weird. So I had to redo the lettering so that it fit in that space a little bit better. Something that I treat is like when typography is with an illustration, kerning is the space between each letter in typography. And I treat that space, but it's supposed to be a rhythm, like equal spaces between each letter. I put that same amount of space or something very visually similar to the illustration, from the illustration to the letters. And that is how I decide if the text fits in the space, right? Here I am just erasing some extra lines. I thought that I needed to make the blanket a little bit visually lighter, so I had to erase a little bit of line weight to lighten that up. This is one way to achieve a really carved effect too, is that like erasing of the corners. All right, now to go draw the real lines. Perhaps the most crucial part of this whole process is the step right here. I've sped it up the most because there's not as much to say about it, but here is when I'm being very careful and meticulous with my lines. I use Photoshop on the iPad, so here I have the smoothing set to anywhere between 20 and 100%, depending on the length of the stroke that I'm making. And I'm using that smoothing effect to get the crispest, cleanest lines that I can. But I don't make it too smooth. Like there is a lot of careful attention that I'm paying to the curves to add the tiniest bit of undulation in a specific way. Like it's strategic. I am trying to show the form of the horse without overly exaggerating each shape. It's very subtle, but it makes a difference. Anyway, you'll see here like the way I did the mouth, just really carefully visually carving out the shapes that I'm trying to show with as few marks as possible. So I'm just gonna ramp up the speed on this a little bit and let it play, let the music come through. The next step is the final step, which is when I take it to Adobe Illustrator. But for this step, I am just going to be as close to perfect as it can be. You'll see my file size isn't huge, like it's a little bit pixelated when I zoom all the way in, and that's okay. Just wait for it. You'll see why, like how it all comes together really soon. Once the outline is where you'd like it to be, we're going to remove the sketch from the background so it's just the black outline on white, and we're going to take it to Photoshop. In my case, it was already in Photoshop. Here you want to do a little bit of a Gaussian blur and then adjust the levels. I did the Gaussian blur on a second layer and then multiplied it over the bottom so that the line weight almost became a little bit thicker. And then I scooched that lightness from the levels all the way up, and this kind of gives the carved effect that doing it by hand got really close to, but this just makes it a little bit more clear. From here, I like to go in and add a little bit of texture, distorting and then doing the ripple effect is my favorite way. I'll do it with a little bit of the medium and a little bit of the small, just so that it's not too geometric, I guess. Like, it's so algorithmic that you kind of have to do both so that it just randomizes it a little bit. This is a really subtle amount of texture that I'm adding here, but I think it's critical to the process. After the texture, I go in and I do a tiny bit more Gaussian blur. And then I take a PNG of that into Illustrator. And the reason for that is the Gaussian blur will help the image trace later. It kind of makes it a little bit smoother and you have less stray vectors and vector points. Once we're in Adobe Illustrator, we're going to use image trace to get the final effect and the final vector art that we're looking for. Here I'm showing you that I always use black and white, and I always toggle on ignore color because it's annoying to delete all the little holes later. Also make sure fills is checked and not strokes. Next, you're gonna play with the settings. I always turn off corners and I always turn off snapped curves to lines because I do not like the way that those settings look. Here I'm gonna mess around with the number of paths, the number of anchor points, and the noise to get the effect that I'm looking for. It's not drastically different than the outline in its final version, but it's just a little bit cleaner, a little bit more chiseled, and a little bit more rough and tumble, I guess, a little bit more vintage looking. And yeah, this is how I create my illustrations for logos. A lot of it is in the initial sketch and the visual direction you're going from, but the actual process is there. That's exactly what I do for almost everything. I hope you found this helpful, entertaining, useful. Comment below what was new to you, what new information was presented. Let me know what you're working on and what you want to learn next. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, follow me on Instagram, follow me on TikTok. I'm by Meg Burke everywhere. And I appreciate you for sticking around and watching my tutorial. Good luck with everything that you do in your future. Happy illustrating.